Hello everyone. The arena. I threw that together a few weeks ago, actually, early on in the development of the game to kind of help me, test some animation-related features, and I thought, well, this would be a good topic for the week. In fact, actually, ME on the Discord channel requested it. Animation state machines and manager, and the funny thing is, when I saw that comment, that was more or less the direction I was thinking of. I mentioned in the last update that I was losing patience with the animations listener, and well, that's what you're looking at here. And really, look at the left side panel here. That's not even half of it. Click the little camera button here and get a image of the whole behavior, and yeah, I mean, look at this thing. It is a monster. No, could make nice wallpaper. I mean, look at all that. So what this behavior does is this manages transitions from one animation to another. And well, you can see, you even see the title here, Stencil Jam 18. So I mentioned before, this whole project started as my entry into the Stencil Jam contest. Have 10 days to make a game in stencil from scratch. For those of you that are familiar with Ludum Dare, it's sort of an extended version of that, but if you've never heard of that, maybe you've heard of NaNoWriMo. Kind of the same idea. Of course, with NaNoWriMo, you have a month to write a novel, but it's the same sort of thing where you have to start from scratch. And, well, the thing about Ludum Dare, you only have 2 days, and that's not a lot of time. So, I like to suggest that people look at Ludum Dare games, because one of the rules is you have to share your code, at least for the compo. So it's a great resource, actually, if you're learning how to do something, because there's just tons and tons of code out there. You can take someone's game, pull it apart, and see how it works. The problem is you're probably not going to write very good code in 2 days. And with Stencil Jam, while you have 10 days, that's 5 times as long, that's still a very, very tight deadline. So you're not necessarily going to write good code. If it works, great. If it doesn't, patch it together. So, this animations listener behavior, it feels like a huge wad of duct tape. I think I mentioned this earlier, that handling animations gets exponentially more complex with the number of animations. And I showed off my player character, Marika, and she has about 45 or 50 animations, but transitioning from one to the other is a pain. And when you look at the video clip that I put with the arena, there are several animation mistakes. And I don't mean art-related mistakes. I mean handling animation mistakes. Although, since I'm self-teaching myself art, I'm sure there are some animation errors in there as well. But, on the programming side, there are some that stand out to me. And one of them is if she's hit in the middle of the air, it does not transition to either the damage state or the falling state. It continues with the jumping state, which is kind of a bad thing, because then the player doesn't know if the player character is taking damage, which is important feedback to get, because otherwise you just see the hit point counter go down, and it just doesn't seem fair, because the damage delay is still there. So the player's kind of frozen for a moment when they take damage, but there's no animation to show that. So it's beyond just a visual problem. It affects the gameplay as well. But there's another issue too. What kind of game is Rogue of Vallas? So I call it an ARPG, action role-playing game. Is it a beat-em-up? I don't have a lot of experience with beat-em-ups, actually. I mentioned before, I grew up with DOS games, primarily. My brother and I each had Game Boys, and we had friends that, had Nintendos, but, most of our games were DOS games. So, some of the classics, like, Double Dragon, Streets of Rage, those kinds of games, we just didn't grow up with. we did have executioners. And I remember this game, and let me find a screenshot here of the gameplay. I remember playing this. We had the demo version. We had the demos of a lot of these things. They're all shareware, so we download them from HAL PC, the Houston area bulletin board system, and play these. Of course, my brother also had the Tiger Double Dragon game. I remember these Tiger electronic games. If you didn't grow up with those, what you see there is basically what you get. LCD game. Don't let the speaker fool you. Basically, you're going to get little beeps out of this. But, to take on car trips or something like that, they were fun enough to entertain you for an hour or two. But, Road to Vallas is not really that kind of game. But it does have a lot of the properties of that game. And, well, I'm redoing the animation listener. So what I'm going to do is separate states and animations. A lot of the stencil games that I'm aware of, just by listening, or not listening, because I can't listen to the forum posts, but by reading people's forum posts and on Discord, and just what I can kind of gather from how a lot of people design their games, is using animations to double as the role of the state the characters are in. So, for Marika, for example, she has about 45 animations. There's an air attack animation, an attack animation, a climbing animation. But these are more than just animations. These are also states that the player character can be in. So, if, for example, she is falling, then not only do I have a falling animation, but there's also a falling state. And the state defines what controls are enabled, how the controls behave. For example, when you're falling, you can't jump. So in the falling state, the jump control, is disabled. And the way that usually is implemented in code, let me get my jumping animation to show you, if I can find it. Yeah, look at all these behaviors I have. I have a lot of these. But there it is, player jump. Chances are, if you're a developer that uses Stencil, you probably do something like this, where you check if the player's in the right animation. So the way I have that set up is, there's a Boolean if self can jump, but the can jump is looking at the animation. In fact, you can see right there, checking the animation. Now I kind of hacked together something, because there are different animations that the player could be in that would enable them to jump. In fact, I have that be configured. It's all configured in one animations listener. That's why it's such a huge behavior, because look at this. It's a mess. But I can list the animations that, each particular state. So for example, let me scroll up here. If the player is in any of these animations, then they're in the falling state. This is probably not the best way to handle this, and the cracks in the system are starting to show. I will say, in my experience with this system has been really good until the number of animations got large. So if you're designing a game that has a relatively small number of animations, this kind of approach is actually not bad. It's just at a certain point, you need to move on to something more sophisticated. So I don't have much to show about the direction I'm going right now. I'm starting to put together a state manager and at the same time a controls manager, and I can tell you a little bit about how this is going to work. So when the player, say, pushes the Action 1 button, which by default is Z, then this variable defines what event will trigger when that button is hit. So when the state of the player changes, that will automatically redefine what the Z button does. And I actually have my isometric game, the Towers of Vallas game, set up this way. And I don't know, the funny thing to me is that animations wide, it's such a simpler game. I mean, the sprites are just a few pixels wide and a few pixels tall, so there's just not many animations I can have. So, why it's set up that way over there is just because, that engine it's not built on top of Stencil, it's not built under it, it's kind of built alongside it. But there's a lot of lower level routines that I kind of hijack from the Stencil engine and take care of myself, and animation's one of them actually, for the most part. So I think, in a couple weeks or so I can share how this system works and, maybe provide some good advice as to how to handle a large number of animations and states in Stencil. But just to clarify, a state and an animation I'm going to separate. So right now they're kind of both the same thing, and one of the negative consequences, I have to do things like this. There are two different animations that can play when Marika starts falling. One of them is the fall animation. This is the one that plays if she just kind of walks off an edge and bloop, drops down. But if she's, say, punched off the edge of a platform, like in the arena, then she enters this state instead. And this is just a visual change. There's no, difference in the controls. So, having two different animations for the same state is kind of clunky. So what I would like to do is just have one state, the falling state, and then pick an animation to play when the character enters that state. So that's not done yet, but there is something I would like to share. This is really just kind of a question that came up on the Discord channel, and I wrote a little text response to it, but there's a question, I've seen it come up a few times. How do you implement per frame hitboxes? And let me illustrate what I mean by that. Let me hide that. So we're going to run the game again. We're going to enter that arena. So the way to enter the arena, go into the debug mode and then control 1 or control 2. We'll give you one of two different arenas. So here we go. So you can see I can jump, I can kick. There's the falling state, and there's a splat. Now if you do up 2, up 1, there we go. So you see the 3 boxes around her? So the way I have this defined is those aren't collision boxes like you would normally define in the collision box editor. So Stencil does give you a collision box editor, just in case you've never used Stencil before. Let me show you what that looks like. So here I have all my animations, and here I have collision boxes. But you can see this is defined per animation. So for something like a beat-em-up game, a fighting game, where you want the collision boxes to differ depending on the frame of the animation, then you kind of have to set that up yourself. So I can show you how I did that. And I kind of, say this is probably not a beginner topic, but if you're comfortable with blocks, I'd say you could probably implement this. I have this implemented in typed code just because for lower level routines like handling data and that kind of thing, I just prefer to have typed in hacks for that. But using the visual block language, you could do that. But just illustrate these boxes here. See how when she's running, there's that frame, and I think it's easier to see this if you watch her feet. Because right now she has her back leg kind of up, mid-stride there, and we have a very long rectangle. But then in this state, it's taller and narrower. So, these boxes follow her movements. Like that. Oh, well, whoops. Okay, we'll start over. But there's also another side of this too. So let me get a guy out here. Okay, so there's a bad guy. And he's defined the same way, where the hitboxes follow him. But there's also a yellow box. So let me show you the yellow box. So if I punch, you see the green box there? So the green box and yellow box is determining where damage occurs. So on the player character, the green box is, her fist. If she kicks, there. The green box on her feet there is, the kick. That's effectively a weapon, a melee weapon. I mean, that's how it's coded. It's a melee weapon. And what we're doing here is just a simple AABB check. If the player's green attack box overlaps any of the enemy's red hitboxes, then a hit is detected. But the nice thing about this feature is I can now differentiate between, say, a kick to the legs or a kick to the head. And I can, affect the character's statistics accordingly. So, if you get kicked in the head, you're probably going to lose some consciousness, whereas you get kicked in the feet, it's probably not going to be as much damage. I haven't quite implemented all that yet, but the data I need to do that is there. There we go. Let me get another guy out here. So, you can pause that. So let's see if I can have him. Whoops. Well, let's see if I can get him. Yeah, okay. So his hitbox, I guess, disappears too quickly. It's only up for 1 frame. I guess I won't try to get it. All right, so let me show you how this works. I'm actually pretty proud of myself for thinking of this. So there's 2 parts of this, and the first part is the code. So I have a hitbox code here. Now again, if you're used to visual language, some of this may not be recognizable, but really what you're looking at here is a custom class called Hitbox. And what this allows me to define is, let me go down here. Here we go. So I can define, a hitbox, and then there's some routines I would need, for example, to determine if a particular point is inside the hitbox, or probably more importantly, if they overlap. So here we go. Box and box checks for an overlap. This routine's actually from my isometric engine. So actually, no, it's not. I think I re-implemented it. Yeah, there it is. So simple AABB overlap check. I guess if you want that function, you can pause the video here and look at it. But it is, all it really does is return true if 2 boxes overlap and false if they don't. So if I go back to Hitbox, I'll walk you through kind of what a punch looks like and a kick looks like, so you can see that. But what I need to do is load the hitboxes. So let me show you how I did that. That means you have to find my my data here. So I'm going to Marika, and I have, there it is, poses. Okay, so VGA poses. The hitboxes, I don't know how well this is visible on the screen here, but you can see these little red boxes. Basically what I did is I drew these over a sprite sheet. So you can pull up the sprite sheet that has all the sprites, like here are the sprites. In fact, actually they're all here. Yeah, there we go. So I have, there's the character sprites that you could find in the resources folder. So if you go into the resources folder in your project, pull this up, and then I drew these boxes over them. Now, and I don't know how well this comes across, and let me zoom in a little bit here. But one thing I want to point out is you see how they're different brightnesses. So the legs are pretty dark, whereas the head is really bright. The intensity of the red defines how vulnerable that position is. So, if you're hit in the head, it's going to cause a lot more damage than if you're hit in the body or certainly the legs. The legs are pretty dark, so if she gets hit in the legs, it's not going to do as much damage as the head. And then for the attacks, let me see. Here we go. Here's an attack. Oh, not that punch. Other punch. Oh, where'd it go? Oh, there we go. So, these boxes were drawn over the punching attack. Okay, so the next thing then is once I have this data, let me hide this out here. You have to then read the data. This is probably the most intensive part of the code. I see here load boxes. I don't want to talk through this whole thing. This isn't a tutorial, but I will say, if you're a member of the Discord chat or the forum, certainly feel free to ask me if you want to know a little bit more detail of how this works. I'm certainly happy to share code. Just understand it's not wrapped up as a proper extension. So I'm willing to share the code, but what you see right now is basically what you would get. I just don't have the time to package this up as an extension. Maybe in the future, but not right now. But I can tell you how this would work. And the basic idea is you load the images, and then a lot of this is really just the math to read those red and green pixels and turn that into a box. So once that's turned into a box, I now have, and I can bring the game back up here. Let me load this again. Get into the arena, and there we go. So you recognize those boxes. You don't see the intensity of the red this time, but that data is loaded. So that punch, for example, I showed off. There's the green box you saw, as well as, I think I showed you the falling animation, so you can now see the different boxes there from that falling animation. Okay, so now how do you use this data? Okay, let me show you that too. So I'll walk you through what happens when Marika throws a punch, because that's probably one of the simplest cases. So there's the player's punch attack. So this is set up a little unconventionally. One thing that I really try to do as much as possible is write modular code, and I'm very, very thankful I did this, because when I basically rip out that animations manager and replace it, all I really have to do is replace the cost of these events. I don't have to replace all of this code itself. But player punches or hits hopefully they don't punch their keyboard, they hit the key on the keyboard for the punch. So that triggers the can punch event. Can punch, right now this checks if the player is in the correct state. And the only way I do this is I have a list of animations. In fact, I could show you. Player punch attack, yeah. These are the animations that correspond to the can attack state. And again, this is the thing I want to replace, so I don't have to manage a list of animations like this. I just have, is the player in the attack ready state? But assuming that's true, we actually execute the punch. So here's how the punch is executed. There's some calculations here to determine whether or not it's a weak punch or a strong punch. Pretty straightforward actually here, just checking if some numbers are within the range. But I ground attack 2. These are all animation related. You can see here the animations listener is the one that actually hears that event, and that actually enters the animation. Now, there is a second animation that plays after a given time, and just balancing the time here is another thing I'm trying to move away from, because that's really bad too. But then going back to the punch. So where does the punch actually occur? So this event, Hitboxes updated. Basically, let me show, there's one more behavior here, Hitbox Manager. Let me open this one up. So every frame, so this is, here we go. Every time the animation changes, I do a hitbox update. A hitbox update also occurs every time the frame changes. So it happens both times. And the frame change, I don't remember off the top of my head exactly where that's triggered, but basically every time the frame changes in the animation, I run the hitbox update. So it's not actually, at this point, it's no longer related to the attack. The actual damage is going to be triggered in this hitbox update routine. And here we go. Hitboxes updated is an event that triggers pretty much every time the hitboxes change. So the hitboxes themselves is a list of those colored boxes you see for every animation. And when the Hitboxes updated routine triggers, a lot of different behaviors are listening for that, including the punch attack. So, all these other events that trigger the punch, all they really do is set the animation in sequence. This is triggered as part of the animation update routine, and every time the hitboxes are changed, this code is run. I think at first glance this might sound like it's terribly inefficient, and I am thinking at some point in the future I would like to even make a proper tutorial how to write efficient code actually, or how to measure the efficiency of your code. Big O notation, for example, is extremely useful. How do you know if something is efficient or not? It's a very popular question, particularly in the Discord chat. Is such and such code, going to be inefficient? And my initial impression when I hear a lot of these questions is I understand why they're asked, but at the same time, almost every time I get that question, the answer is no. It's good enough. I think managing CPU cycles is like managing a large fortune. Say you win the lottery. Now you have billions and billions of CPU cycles available to do your calculations every second. However, a lot of people who win the lottery end up losing all their money. So you still need to manage your fortune. Even if you have a large fortune, you still need to manage it. And that takes a lot of experience to learn when you should be concerned about efficiency and when you shouldn't be. My general rule is if I have to choose between efficiency and readability, if the efficiency isn't going to matter, go with readability. Because eventually you're going to forget what code you wrote, and you're going to have to relearn what you did. So the easier you can make it to read, the better off you'll be, just managing your code. So yeah, this system makes perfect sense to me, actually. It is inefficient, but it's not inefficient enough to really matter. If it takes, a nanosecond to run versus 10 nanoseconds, who cares? So yeah, this basically checks every hitbox against every other hitbox and looks for an overlap. And when the overlap's detected, that is when damage occurs. So yeah, here's the actual check. I don't want to highlight that. Can I highlight just, okay, that little box here. That is the check for the overlap between the two hitboxes. And I'm not actually using the data right now that I've read, with vulnerability for hitboxes. Like I said, I haven't implemented that yet, but the data's there. I could pull that data from the hitbox itself, and damage occurs. So there we go. I don't think it's quite so simple, but it works. It actually works very well. No efficiency issues whatsoever. Pretty solid. It's easy to get the data in. The thing with adding the images is that I just want to be able to pull the sprite sheet from the player character and draw over it. And then I can load those drawings back into Stencil, and I should say the game, because the game's code is what's handling this, not the Stencil engine. And I can load it into the game, and data's there. Per frame hitboxes. Extremely useful for any kind of game where you have a lot of melee action. Yeah, that's the thing about this game too. Is like I said, it's not a beat 'em up game. It is an RPG, but your number of weapons that you have, like axes and knives, are very limited. And part of the objective of the game is for the player to learn how to use those rare tools effectively. Get the most use out of them. And in the introductory levels I've been constructing, each one is kind of designed to take advantage of one kind of weapon, really just to kind of give the player the opportunity to learn how to use them in different ways. One of my favorite levels so far is that high security compound, because I think it's probably one of my better efforts to force the player to learn something, how to do special moves with the knife. And Then the axe, of course, is introduced early on. But there's only so many of those weapons to go around. So for a lot of the game, the player is really relying on hand-to-hand combat. And as the game progresses, the player will be able to unlock new skills for doing more interesting things other than just basic punches and kicks. But that is what you start with, just basic punches and kicks, and maybe a couple special moves. So that pretty much wraps up this update. Actually, just wanted to kind of say where I am, where I'm going, and since the opportunity arose, maybe give some ideas on how you can get per frame hitboxes in here. It did take me some time to do this, but once the system works, it's great. And if you want to borrow my code, you're certainly welcome to have it. I certainly don't mind sharing code. Just again, what you see is what you get. So it's not something that's packaged up very nicely. You'll have to do some things to it to make it work. Anyway, that's all I have. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.